May 20th, 1942. Station Hypo Basement, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The message trembled slightly in Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer's exhausted hands as he read the decoded Japanese text, knowing these words could determine the fate of the Pacific War. The enemy fleet composition at AF includes 2 carriers, 7 cruisers, and numerous destroyers. Through bleary eyes that hadn't seen sleep in 3 days, he stared at the intercept that had just emerged from their IBM tabulating machines, Operational Order 14, containing Admiral Yamamoto's complete battle plan for what the Japanese believed would be their decisive victory. In a windowless basement beneath Pearl Harbor's administrative building, a team of cryptanalysts had just achieved what the Imperial Japanese Navy considered mathematically impossible. They had broken JN-25, Japan's most sophisticated naval code, and the Japanese had absolutely no idea. Commander Joseph John Rochefort shuffled across the basement floor in his slippers and red smoking jacket, a bathrobe he'd worn for so many consecutive days that his staff had stopped noticing. His desk sign read, "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps." Yet this dishevelled appearance concealed the most brilliant cryptanalytic mind in the US Navy. What none of the Japanese admirals planning their massive operation knew was that this moment would trigger the most catastrophic intelligence failure in naval history, a systematic blindness to code compromise that would send the Imperial Navy to its destruction. The team Rochefort commanded in this freezing basement, nicknamed the Dungeon for its poor ventilation and perpetual cold, was processing 140 Japanese messages daily. By the end of May, they would handle even more in the critical days before Admiral Chester Nimitz issued his Midway orders. The Japanese, supremely confident in their cryptographic superiority, continued transmitting their most secret operational plans through a system they believed unbreakable, never suspecting that American cryptanalysts were intercepting their communications. The mathematics of Japanese defeat were being calculated not on battlefields, but on IBM punch cards in a Pearl Harbor basement, a systematic demolition of Japanese strategic planning through the methodical breaking of a code the Imperial Navy would trust until the very end of the war. The Imperial Japanese Navy introduced JN-25 on June 1, 1939, replacing a system that had served since 1931. To Japanese cryptographers in the Navy's 4th Department, Communications, this represented the pinnacle of cryptographic security, a 2-layer system of such complexity that breaking it would require computational power that didn't exist. The code consisted of approximately 30,000 code groups in its initial version, expanding to nearly 45,000 by 1942, each a 5-digit number divisible by 3, a feature intended as a garble check to identify transmission errors. This mathematical quirk, meant to ensure accuracy, would ironically provide American cryptanalysts their first foothold into the system. Words, phrases, and even individual syllables were first encoded using a massive codebook, then disguised through false addition using random numbers from separate cipher tables containing 50,000 possible additives. Captain Ito Tsunezo, head of the Japanese Navy's Communications Security Section, had personally overseen JN-25's development. In post-war interrogations, he would admit, "We believed the system was absolutely secure." The possibilities were astronomical. With tens of thousands of code groups and 50,000 additives, the combinations exceeded anything that could be analyzed by human calculation. But the Japanese had made a fatal miscalculation. They had never imagined that the Americans would adapt commercial IBM tabulating equipment, machines designed for census data and accounting, to perform cryptanalytic functions. These machines could sort through millions of combinations, identify patterns invisible to human analysis, and perform in hours calculations that would take teams of mathematicians years to complete manually. When JN-25B replaced JN-25A on December 1, 1940, just over a year before Pearl Harbor, American cryptanalysts faced the crushing realization that months of work had been rendered useless. They would have to start from scratch, rebuilding their understanding of the new system while war clouds gathered over the Pacific. By the morning of December 7th, 1941, they had recovered only enough to read perhaps 10 to 15% of intercepted messages, enough to sense increased Japanese naval activity, but not enough to predict where the strike would occur. Station Hypo occupied what one visitor described as the most depressing military workspace in the Pacific. The basement location meant no windows, no natural light, and air that grew increasingly stale as the day progressed. The constant hum of IBM machines mixed with cigarette smoke from chain-smoking analysts created an atmosphere that newcomers found almost unbearable. Yet Rochefort had assembled here what Admiral Nimitz would later call the most valuable intelligence unit in the history of naval warfare. The team was small, roughly 30 to 50 personnel at its peak during the Midway crisis, but included some of the Navy's most brilliant minds. Lieutenant Commander Wesley Ham Wright, whose physical resemblance to actor Wallace Beery belied his mathematical genius, would often work problems for 48 hours straight, sustained only by coffee and determination. Lieutenant Joseph Finnegan, whom colleagues called our Babe Ruth for his ability to hit cryptanalytic home runs, had barely survived the Pearl Harbor attack when the USS Tennessee was bombed. Saved from the burning battleship, he channeled his desire for revenge into code-breaking with an intensity that worried even Rochefort. It was Finnegan who would make the crucial breakthrough in solving the Japanese date-time cipher, working backwards from intercepted weather reports to crack the super-encipherment that protected operational dates. Marine Major Alva Red Laswell served as chief translator, a mathematical genius who had never finished high school, but possessed an intuitive understanding of Japanese language patterns that proved invaluable. Witnesses described him working with green eyeshade pulled low against the fluorescent lights, cigar clenched in his teeth, totally absorbed in Japanese text. Commander Thomas Dyer, the mathematical genius behind many crucial breakthroughs, maintained the sign that captured the dungeon's atmosphere. After particularly intense sessions, witnesses described him emerging unshaven, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, gait betraying how close he was to utter exhaustion. By May 1942, this small team had recovered enough of JN-25B's code groups and additives to read approximately 40% of intercepted traffic. Not enough for word-for-word translations, but sufficient for what intelligence professionals call gisting, determining the general meaning and operational significance of Japanese communications. The adaptation of International Business Machines Corporation equipment for code breaking represented a revolution that Japanese cryptographers never anticipated. Station Hypo operated IBM 601 multiplying punches, along with sorters, collators, tabulators, and key punches, machines that could process thousands of punch cards per hour, each card containing 80 columns of data representing intercepted code groups. The breakthrough in mechanization came through systematic pattern recognition. Cryptanalyst Thomas Dyer realized that Japanese radio operators, despite instructions to begin encoding at random points in their cipher tables, habitually started at convenient positions, page 1, line 1, or other easily remembered locations. This human weakness created patterns that IBM machines could identify and exploit. A single IBM run in April 1942 revealed something extraordinary. The machines identified that certain groups appeared repeatedly at the beginning of messages. Ham Wright hypothesized these might represent numerals, as Japanese messages often began with references like, "Your message number 473. Comparing these patterns with an old Japanese diplomatic code the Navy had obtained years earlier confirmed Wright's theory. The Japanese were using the same numeral encoding system they had considered obsolete. The custom modifications to IBM equipment were remarkable. By spring 1941, the Navy had commissioned purpose-built machines with over 75 special attachments designed specifically for cryptanalytic functions. These machines could perform depth analysis, identifying messages encoded with identical additive sequences, in minutes rather than days. One Navy report noted that comparing two 200-letter messages for patterns took a skilled analyst 10 hours by hand. The IBM equipment could process the same comparison in under 3 minutes. The investment was staggering for the era. The Navy was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars annually on IBM equipment rental and custom modifications. The machines consumed so much electricity that Station HYPO required its own dedicated power supply. Yet without these machines, breaking JN-25 would have been impossible. The Imperial Japanese Navy's confidence in JN-25 bordered on absolute faith. Commander Yamamoto Yuji, a senior cryptographic officer, would testify after the war. "We considered the Americans incapable of understanding our language at the level required for cryptanalysis. Combined with our mathematical security, we believed JN-25 was not just unbreakable, we believed the Americans wouldn't even attempt to break it." This arrogance permeated Japanese military thinking. The Naval General Staff's intelligence assessment in 1941 stated that fewer than 100 Americans possessed sufficient Japanese language skills for military translation, and none had the combination of linguistic and mathematical expertise required for cryptanalysis. They were catastrophically wrong. The US Navy had been systematically training officers in Japanese since the 1920s, sending them to live in Japan and achieve near-native fluency. The Japanese made another critical error in assuming that code security rested solely on mathematical complexity. They ignored the human factors that create cryptographic vulnerabilities. Radio operators under pressure used shortcuts. Tired clerks began encoding at convenient starting points. Weather stations sent reports at identical times using predictable formats. Supply officers transmitted requisitions with stereotyped language. Each pattern provided what cryptanalysts call cribs, known or guessed plaintext that could unlock entire messages. Even more damaging was the Japanese Navy's institutional rigidity. The same culture that produced unwavering loyalty also prevented critical examination of security procedures. When unusual events occurred, American carriers appearing at precisely the right defensive positions, submarines lying in wait along secret routes, naval leadership attributed these coincidences to superior American reconnaissance rather than communications compromise. Post-war testimony revealed the depth of this delusion. Admiral Fukudome Shigeru, Yamamoto's chief of staff, stated, "Even after the war, when Americans told us they had been reading our codes, many officers refused to believe it. They insisted there must have been traitors." April 28, 1942, marked the beginning of the end for Japanese cryptographic security. On that day, Station Hypo intercepted a message that electrified the basement crew. Japanese naval forces were ordered to complete all preparations and await further orders. The target was designated only as AF. Rochefort had seen this designator before. His team had been tracking AF references for weeks, noting that whenever Japanese forces operated near Midway Atoll, the designation appeared in their communications. But correlation wasn't proof, and Washington's codebreakers at OP-20G insisted AF meant the Aleutian Islands or even Hawaii itself. The debate raged through early May, with Admiral Nimitz caught between conflicting intelligence assessments. Rochefort needed proof. The solution came from Jasper Holmes, a submarine officer forcibly retired due to arthritis, who had been recalled to serve in intelligence. Holmes understood Midway's critical vulnerability. The island's water supply depended entirely on a desalination plant. On May 19th, Rochefort proposed Holmes's deception to Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer. Using the secure underwater cable connecting Pearl Harbor to Midway, impossible for the Japanese to tap, they would instruct Midway's garrison to broadcast an emergency message in plain language, reporting that their water distillation plant had suffered an explosion. The trap was set on May 20th. Midway broadcast the fake distress call on frequencies the Japanese routinely monitored. Within 24 hours, Japanese intelligence at Kwajalein intercepted the American message and immediately reported to Combined Fleet Headquarters in JN-25. AF is short of fresh water due to failure of distillation plant. When Station Hypo decoded this Japanese message on May 22nd, the basement erupted. They had not only confirmed Midway as the target, but also proven beyond doubt that they were reading current Japanese operational traffic. The Japanese had swallowed the deception completely, never questioning why the Americans would broadcast such sensitive information in clear text. Knowing where the Japanese would attack was crucial, but Nimitz needed to know when. Japanese messages included date-time groups that were super-enciphered, encrypted separately before being encoded in JN-25. This additional layer had frustrated American cryptanalysts for months. The breakthrough came through painstaking analysis of weather reports. Joseph Finnegan noticed that Japanese weather stations transmitted at precise times each day, and their reports always included the date and time of observation. By comparing hundreds of these messages with known transmission times, Finnegan and Wright gradually constructed a table that could convert the enciphered date-time groups back to readable dates. On May 24th, the system yielded its secret. A message from Yamamoto specified end day as June 4th, with the attack to commence at 0200 Tokyo time. Another intercept confirmed the Midway invasion force would arrive 7 June, 3 days after the carrier strike. Edwin Layton, reviewing these decrypts, made his famous prediction to Admiral Nimitz. Admiral, the Japanese will attack Midway on June 4th. They will approach from the northwest at bearing 325 degrees. They will launch their aircraft at 0400 local time from a position 175 miles from Midway. Nimitz studied his intelligence officer carefully before responding. You're confident in this assessment, Layton? Admiral, I'll be wrong by 5 minutes, 5 degrees and 5 miles at most. On June 4th, 1942, at 0534 local time, a PBY Catalina flying boat spotted the Japanese carrier force, bearing 320 degrees, distance 180 miles from Midway. The intelligence had been virtually perfect. The crown jewel of Station Hypo's code-breaking came on May 20th with the interception of Operational Order 14. This massive 12-part message contained Yamamoto's entire battle plan, including force composition, timing and coordination between the Midway attack and Aleutian diversion. The decoded sections revealed staggering detail. The first carrier striking force under Admiral Nagumo would approach Midway from the northwest with 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu and Hiryu. These ships would carry 248 aircraft. The invasion force would include 5,000 troops aboard 12 transports. Support forces would include 7 battleships, including Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. Crucially, intercepts in early May confirmed that 2 of Japan's newest carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, damaged at Coral Sea, would not participate. This reduced Japanese carrier strength from 6 to 4, dramatically improving American odds. Other intercepted messages filled in operational details. A May 13th communication revealed submarine deployments. Submarine Squadron 3 will establish patrol line 150 miles northwest of Hawaii by N-2 day. Knowing this, Nimitz ordered his carriers to leave Pearl Harbor on May 28th and 30th, before the Japanese submarines arrived on June 2nd. Supply messages exposed the operation's massive scale. One intercept specified fuel requirements. Tanker group will provide 2,800 tons heavy oil, 1,200 tons aviation fuel at position 30 degrees north, 170 degrees east on N+3 day. Such details not only confirmed timing, but revealed vulnerability. The Japanese were operating at the extreme limit of their logistical capabilities. Not everyone believed Station Hypo's analysis. In Washington, Commander John Redman headed OP-20G, the Navy's main cryptanalytics center, and he fundamentally disagreed with Rochefort's methods and conclusions. Where Rochefort relied on linguistic understanding and intuition, Redman emphasized pure mathematical analysis. The Redman brothers, John in cryptanalysis and his brother Rear Admiral Joseph as Director of Naval Communications, had powerful allies. They convinced Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, that Rochefort was a maverick ignoring proper channels and feeding Nimitz unreliable intelligence. On May 14th, OP-20G issued a formal intelligence estimate stating the Japanese target was probably the Aleutian Islands, possibly the west coast of the United States. They accused Hypo of wish fulfillment, seeing what they wanted in ambiguous intercepts. The bureaucratic battle nearly derailed American preparations. Admiral King, who disliked Rochefort's unmilitary appearance and direct communication with Nimitz, was inclined to side with Washington. It took Nimitz's personal intervention, backed by the AF water shortage proof, to maintain focus on Midway. Even after Hypo's vindication at Midway, the Redman brothers sought revenge. They convinced King that Station Hypo had been lucky rather than good, and that proper cryptanalytic work required Washington's centralized control. By October 1942, Rochefort would be relieved of command and sent to oversee a floating dry dock, a humiliating end for the man who had made Midway victory possible. Breaking JN-25 required unprecedented international cooperation. The British Far East Combined Bureau, FECB, originally established in Hong Kong in 1935, had actually achieved the first breakthrough against JN-25 in 1939. John Tiltman at Bletchley Park identified the system's basic structure and the divisibility by 3 that marked all valid code groups. When Japan introduced JN-25B on December 1, 1940, the British made an immediate discovery that saved months of work. The Japanese had changed the codebook but not the additive tables. This meant messages encoded in late November and early December could be compared to strip away the encryption layer. By March 1941, FECB had recovered nearly 3,000 code groups, which they shared with the Americans. The Dutch contribution came from Kamer 14 at Bandung Technical College in Java, led by Lieutenant Commander Leo Brewer. The Dutch had been intercepting Japanese naval communications since 1936 and possessed unique insights into Japanese radio procedures. When Java fell in March 1942, Brower and his team escaped to Australia with boxes of punch cards containing partially decoded messages. Station Cast on Corregidor made a crucial discovery before their evacuation. In March 1942, they determined that AF was the Japanese designation for Midway, information they relayed to Station Hypo just before being evacuated by submarine. The 74 personnel of Cast were considered so valuable that they were evacuated in multiple submarine runs between February and April 1942, eventually reforming as Frumal in Melbourne. The coordination between these units was remarkable given the distances and primitive communications. Decoded messages were shared via secure cable, recovered code groups distributed through diplomatic pouches, and intercept coverage synchronized to avoid gaps. By May 1942, the Allies were intercepting approximately 60% of Japanese naval radio traffic, though they could only decode about 40% of what they intercepted. The Imperial Japanese Navy's inability to detect JN-25's compromise stemmed from institutional failures beyond mere overconfidence. The Navy's intelligence structure, divided between the 3rd Department, Intelligence, and 4th Department, Communications, created bureaucratic walls that prevented comprehensive security assessment. Captain Itaru Tachibana, who headed the 3rd Department's American section, admitted after the war, "We had no mechanism to correlate operational failures with possible communications compromise. When American forces appeared at optimal positions, the Operations Department blamed poor reconnaissance. No one considered that the Americans might be reading our messages." The Japanese Navy's security procedures actually facilitated American code-breaking. Message originators were required to include full titles and unit designations, providing contextual clues. Acknowledgement messages repeated key portions of original communications. Weather reports, transmitted at identical times daily, provided predictable cribs. Even physical security failures went unnoticed. The January 20th, 1942, sinking of submarine Found 124 in shallow water off Darwin should have triggered immediate concern. The submarine carried current code books that Australian divers might recover. Yet the Japanese made no emergency code changes, assuming the water depth would prevent salvage. They were wrong. Australian divers recovered significant cryptographic material immediately shared with American codebreakers. On June 7, 1942, just 3 days after Midway, the Chicago Tribune published an article that should have destroyed American intelligence advantage. Under the headline, "Navy had word of Jap plan to strike at sea," reporter Stanley Johnston revealed details obtainable only through code breaking. Johnston, who had been aboard the carrier Lexington when it sank at Coral Sea, had seen classified message traffic while recovering on the cruiser Chester. His article specified Japanese force composition, ship names, and operational intentions, information that screamed code compromise. President Roosevelt was furious, considering prosecution under the Espionage Act. Navy Secretary Frank Knox wanted Tribune publisher Colonel Robert McCormick court-martialed, despite his civilian status. The Navy prepared charges that could have resulted in the death penalty. Yet, incredibly, Japanese intelligence never noticed the article. No Japanese agent in America reported it. No neutral diplomat mentioned it. No German intelligence officer warned their Japanese counterparts. The revelation that should have prompted immediate changes to JN-25 passed completely unnoticed. The grand jury proceedings nearly caused more damage than the original article. Prosecutors would have to explain exactly what Johnston revealed and why it mattered. Testimony that would confirm American code-breaking success. Recognizing this danger, the Navy dropped all charges, leaving the Tribune unpunished but the secret miraculously intact. For the cryptanalysts of Station Hypo, victory at Midway brought not celebration but intensified pressure. They knew the Japanese would eventually change their codes, potentially blinding American intelligence at a crucial moment. Every day JN-25 remained readable was a gift that could end without warning. The psychological strain was enormous. These men knew when Japanese convoys would sail, where submarines would patrol, which islands would be invaded, information that could save thousands of American lives. Yet using this intelligence too obviously would reveal the code compromise. Rochefort established strict protocols for disguising intelligence sources. Every piece of information derived from code breaking had to have a plausible alternative explanation. If decrypts revealed a convoy route, commanders were told it came from submarine sightings. When code breaking exposed invasion plans, the intelligence was attributed to captured documents. The strain showed on the cryptanalysts. Thomas Dyer developed chronic insomnia, unable to stop seeing code groups even when he closed his eyes. Wesley Wright suffered severe anxiety, convinced each day would bring the code change that would blind American intelligence. Joseph Finnegan began drinking heavily, trying to forget the Japanese messages describing American prisoners that he translated but couldn't act upon without revealing the source. No event better illustrated both the power and peril of code breaking than Admiral Yamamoto's assassination on April 18, 1943. In early April, Station Hypo's successor organization decoded a message containing Yamamoto's complete travel itinerary for an inspection tour of Solomon Islands bases. The message, transmitted in JN-25D, specified that Yamamoto would arrive at Balali Island at 0945 on April 18th, flying in a Betty bomber with 6 Zero fighters. The precision was remarkable. Japanese staff officers had included every detail in what they believed was completely secure communication. Admiral Nimitz faced an agonizing decision. Yamamoto was Japan's most brilliant naval strategist, architect of Pearl Harbor. His death would devastate Japanese morale. but intercepting his flight at the exact time and location specified would clearly indicate code compromise. The decision went to President Roosevelt, who reportedly said simply, "Get him." American planners constructed an elaborate deception. P-38. Lightning fighters would fly a 435-mile interception route at wavetop height. Other patrols would operate in the area, creating the illusion of routine activity. Coast watchers would be credited with spotting Yamamoto's plane. On April 18th, exactly as predicted, Yamamoto's plane appeared over Bougainville. American P-38s shot down both Betty bombers, killing Yamamoto and his staff. The Japanese Navy was devastated, but incredibly, they made only routine code changes. A board of inquiry concluded that local commanders had been careless with security, never suspecting the ambush resulted from code compromise. By late 1942, breaking JN-25 had evolved from art to industry. The expanded Station Hypo, renamed Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, occupied an entire floor of a new building at Pearl Harbor. IBM machines ran continuously in air-conditioned rooms. 3 shifts of cryptanalysts, translators and analysts processed thousands of messages daily. The systematization was remarkable. Punch card operators, mostly young women recruited from Hawaii's commercial sector, entered intercepted code groups at high speed. IBM machines sorted cards by frequency, identifying potential cribs. Cryptanalysts attacked identified weaknesses, recovering new code groups and additives. Translators converted broken messages to English, while intelligence analysts synthesized information from hundreds of partial decrypts into coherent reports. Quality control became crucial. Every recovered code group was verified against multiple messages. Translation disputes were resolved by committee, with native Japanese speakers having final say. Intelligence reports included confidence levels, distinguishing between confirmed facts and educated guesses. The scale was staggering. By January 1943, FRUPAC maintained a library of millions of punch cards. The IBM machines performed millions of comparisons daily. The monthly electricity bill exceeded that of a small city. Yet for all this mechanization, human intuition remained crucial. Only experienced linguists could deduce that certain code groups represented common Japanese phrases. Only analysts familiar with Japanese doctrine could interpret operational significance. While Midway captured headlines, the systematic destruction of Japan's merchant marine through code intelligence represented JN-25's most devastating impact. By 1943, American submarines were sinking Japanese ships faster than they could be replaced, strangling an island nation dependent on imports. The intelligence advantage was decisive. Decoded messages revealed convoy routes, schedules, and escort compositions. Submarine commanders received ultra-intelligence directing them to specific coordinates where undefended tankers would appear. The Japanese, never suspecting code compromise, attributed losses to the growing submarine force rather than intelligence failures. Commander Richard O'Kane, skipper of USS Tang, received a decoded message in October 1944, revealing a convoy carrying aviation fuel from Borneo to the Philippines. Positioned perfectly by intelligence, Tang sank 7 ships in one night, depriving Japanese aircraft of desperately needed fuel during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The statistics were devastating. American submarines, representing less than 2% of Navy personnel, sank over 30% of Japan's warships and 60% of its merchant marine. Much of this success came from code intelligence revealing not just where ships would be, but what they carried and how they were defended. By late 1944, Japan had lost so many tankers that warships couldn't obtain fuel. Training was curtailed because aviation fuel was unavailable. Island garrisons starved because food transports never arrived. The Japanese economy collapsed as raw materials stopped flowing. All resulted from submarines guided by intelligence the Japanese never knew was compromised. Throughout 1943 and 1944, evidence of code compromise accumulated to levels that should have been impossible to ignore. American submarines consistently intercepted convoys at their most vulnerable points. American carriers appeared wherever Japanese planning assumed they wouldn't be. American forces concentrated against Japanese attacks while leaving other areas undefended. Vice Admiral Ugaki Matome, Yamamoto's successor, noted in his diary, "The enemy seems to have a sixth sense about our operations. Every movement is countered, every plan anticipated. Yet even this near recognition failed to trigger comprehensive security review. The Japanese did make periodic changes to JN-25, introducing new variants roughly every 6 months. JN-25C appeared on May 28, 1942, too late for Midway. JN-25D lasted from August 1942 to March 1943. Each change temporarily reduced American readability, but never for more than a few weeks. The fundamental architecture remained unchanged, and American cryptanalysts had become so proficient they could recover new code groups rapidly. The Japanese Navy's faith in their codes survived even direct evidence. In November 1943, a decoded message revealed the exact route of a convoy carrying reinforcements to Rabaul. American destroyers intercepted and sank every transport. Among the survivors was Commander Kato Tetsuo, a communications officer who reported, "The Americans were waiting at the exact point where we changed course. They must have broken our codes." His report was dismissed as battle fatigue. Kato was reassigned to shore duty and ordered not to discuss his delusions. For the men and women who broke JN-25, victory came with profound moral complexity. They knew their success meant death for thousands of Japanese sailors who were simply serving their country. Every decoded message revealing ship positions translated directly into human casualties. Alva Laswell, the Marine translator, wrote in a private letter, "I decoded the message that led to Yamamoto's death. I had translated his writings, studied his thoughts. When I decoded his itinerary, I signed his death warrant. That knowledge haunts me." The burden was particularly heavy when intercepts revealed hospital ships, prisoner transports, or refugee vessels. International law protected such ships, but positive identification often came only through decoded messages. The cryptanalysts faced impossible choices: reveal intelligence that could save civilians but compromise the code, or remain silent. Some messages revealed Japanese atrocities that couldn't be acted upon without exposing the source. Thomas Dyer later admitted, "We decoded messages about prisoner executions. We had to file them away, knowing revelation meant losing access to all future intelligence." The psychological toll manifested in various ways. Some cryptanalysts became obsessed with perfection, terrified that errors might cost American lives. Others developed emotional detachment, treating decoded messages as puzzles rather than military intelligence. Many struggled with survivor guilt, fighting the war in safety while men they directed faced death. Despite official neglect and bureaucratic persecution, history has vindicated Station Hypo's achievement. Admiral Chester Nimitz stated unequivocally, "Without the intelligence provided by Rochefort and his team, the Pacific War would have lasted at least 2 years longer and cost hundreds of thousands more lives." General Douglas MacArthur admitted, "The Navy's codebreakers gave us eyes to see and ears to hear what the enemy planned. They turned the Pacific from a vast unknown into a battlefield where we knew every enemy move in advance. Even Japanese military historians acknowledge the decisive impact. Professor Tanaka Hiroshi of the Japanese Defense University wrote, "The breaking of JN-25 was more devastating than any military defeat. Throughout the war, Japan was fighting an omniscient enemy who knew our every plan." The true measure of Station Hypo's success lies not in battles won, but battles avoided. Knowing Japanese intentions allowed American forces to concentrate where needed, while leaving other areas undefended. This economy of force, enabled by intelligence, allowed America to fight a two-ocean war with resources that would have been insufficient without code-breaking advantage. Yet recognition came slowly. Rochefort's treatment was particularly egregious. Despite Nimitz's recommendation for the Distinguished Service Medal, Admiral King blocked it. Rochefort was relieved of command in October 1942, sent to supervise a floating dry dock, never receiving another significant intelligence assignment. The medal finally came in 1986, 10 years after his death, presented to his son by President Reagan in a White House ceremony that couldn't undo 4 decades of official neglect. The revelation of American code-breaking success shocked Japanese naval officers more than any other aspect of defeat. During post-war interrogations, many refused to believe the claims until shown actual decrypted messages they had sent years earlier. The psychological impact was devastating. They had been fighting an enemy who could read their most secret thoughts. Admiral Fukudome Shigeru, who had served as Combined Fleet Chief of Staff, stated during his 1949 interrogation, "If we had known you were reading our messages, the entire war would have been fought differently. We would have used different strategies, taken different risks. We were fighting blindfolded." Captain Wachi Tsunezo, who had headed the Naval Intelligence Division, was even more direct. "Our failure to detect code compromise was inexcusable. The signs were everywhere. Your submarines always in position, your carriers where we didn't expect them. We attributed everything to superior reconnaissance and refused to consider the impossible." The revelation triggered soul-searching that continues in Japanese military circles. How could an intelligence service that had broken Russian codes during the Russo-Japanese War fail so completely to protect its own communications? The answer lay in technological ignorance, institutional arrogance, and rigid thinking. The Japanese had never understood the revolution that IBM machines represented. While they struggled with manual encryption, Americans were processing millions of code groups electronically. The technological gap was profound, one side fighting with outdated methods while the other used cutting-edge technology. The breaking of JN-25 established principles that guide signals intelligence today. The operation demonstrated that no code is unbreakable given sufficient intercepted traffic, computational power, and human expertise. It proved that the weakest link in any cryptographic system is human behavior, the shortcuts and patterns operators inevitably make under pressure. The collaboration model developed for JN-25, combining intercept stations, analytical centers, and distributed processing, became the template for modern signals intelligence. The Five Eyes alliance between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand grew directly from partnerships forged in breaking Japanese codes. The ethical frameworks developed at Station Hypo still influence intelligence operations. The principle of protecting sources and methods, even at tactical cost, remains paramount. The integration of signals intelligence with operational planning, pioneered by Rochefort and Nimitz, is now standard military doctrine. Most importantly, JN-25 demonstrated that intelligence superiority can overcome material disadvantage. In June 1942, the Japanese Navy was superior in numbers, experience, and equipment. Yet American codebreakers negated these advantages, enabling inferior forces to achieve decisive victory through superior information. Despite its catastrophic impact, the Japanese Navy's intelligence failure offers warnings that remain relevant. The same overconfidence that blinded Japanese cryptographers appears in every era's assessment of its own security systems. Today's unbreakable encryption may be tomorrow's elementary exercise for quantum computers or artificial intelligence. The Japanese Navy's compartmentalization, which prevented comprehensive security assessment, mirrors modern bureaucratic divisions that inhibit effective counterintelligence. The human factors that compromised JN-25, laziness, routine, predictability, remain primary vulnerabilities in contemporary cryptographic systems. Most sobering is the psychological dimension. The Japanese Navy couldn't conceive their codes were broken because such possibility challenged fundamental assumptions about Japanese superiority. Similar blind spots exist in every nation's intelligence apparatus, things deemed impossible that become achievable through technological advance or ingenuity. Modern militaries study the JN-25 failure as a cautionary tale, yet often miss its most important lesson. The enemy you underestimate is most likely to defeat you. The American cryptanalysts in the Pearl Harbor basement, dismissed by Japanese intelligence as incapable of understanding Japanese codes, systematically destroyed the Imperial Navy through mathematical analysis and mechanical computation. In 1985, surviving members of Station Hypo held their first and only reunion in San Antonio, Texas. Fewer than 30 attended. Age, distance, and death had claimed most of the original team. They gathered not as celebrated heroes, but as elderly men whose greatest achievement remained largely unknown. Thomas Dyer, then 83, gave the keynote address. "We were mathematicians and linguists, not warriors. We fought our war with pencils and punch cards, not guns and bombs. Yet we sank more Japanese ships than any task force, saved more American lives than any medical unit. We were invisible then and remain largely invisible now." Joseph Finnegan, sober for 20 years but still bearing psychological scars, added, "Every Japanese message we decoded represented lives. Japanese sailors who would die, American pilots who would survive. We celebrated successes knowing they meant death for enemies simply following orders. That burden never leaves you." The reunion's most poignant moment came when the group raised a toast to Joe Rochefort, dead 9 years but still their spiritual leader. His son accepted a flag that had flown over Pearl Harbor on June 4, 1982, the 40th anniversary of Midway. The accompanying citation read simply, "To the man who made victory possible." The magnitude of the American code-breaking achievement can be measured in stark statistics, revealing both the operation's scale and decisive impact. Code-breaking infrastructure station. Hypo, 30 to 50 personnel during critical Midway period. Expanding to over 100 by late 1942 at FRUPAC. Total Pacific cryptanalytic personnel, 738 by December 1941, over 5,000 by war's end. 5 major processing centers across the Pacific. IBM machines processing millions of comparisons daily. JN-25, recovery progress, December 1941. 10 to 15% of messages partially readable. April 1942, 20% readability achieved. May 1942, Midway. 40% of code groups recovered. December 1942, 60% readability. By war's end, nearly complete recovery of most variants. Operational impact Midway, 4 Japanese carriers sunk versus 1 American. Submarine campaign, 1,314 Japanese vessels destroyed. Merchant shipping, 60% of Japanese tonnage eliminated. Lives saved, estimated hundreds of thousands of American casualties prevented. Japanese intelligence failures. 0 successful identifications of code compromise. Multiple incidents that should have triggered security review ignored. No comprehensive investigation even after Yamamoto assassination. Post-war. Many officers still refused to believe codes were broken. The battle between code makers and code breakers in the Pacific represented an early example of technological warfare defining future conflicts. While the Japanese relied on printed codebooks and manual encipherment, essentially 19th century technology, the Americans deployed advanced computational equipment. The IBM machines at Station Hypo could perform thousands of comparisons per hour, searching for patterns that would take human analysts months to identify. Custom modifications allowed business machines to perform cryptanalytic functions their designers never imagined. It was primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. The Japanese continued believing manual systems were more secure because they couldn't be analysed mechanically. This fundamental misunderstanding doomed their cryptographic efforts. They never developed mechanical encryption comparable to German Enigma, never employed IBM-style processing, never understood that computational power could defeat mathematical complexity. By 1944, American cryptanalysts were experimenting with even more advanced technologies. Primitive computers using telephone switching equipment could attack super-enciphered code groups. Photographic techniques allowed rapid copying of recovered code values. Radio teletype enabled near-instantaneous intelligence sharing. Each innovation widened the gap between American capabilities and Japanese assumptions. Joe Rochefort died on July 20, 1976, at Little Company of Mary Hospital in Torrance, California. In his final hours, he gave one last interview from his hospital bed, too weak to sit up, speaking barely above a whisper. "People ask if I'm bitter about my treatment. I'm not. The work was its own reward. Every Japanese message we decoded, every American life saved, that's my medal. We proved that in modern war, information is more powerful than firepower. A small team in a basement defeated the Japanese Navy more thoroughly than any fleet engagement could have. We sank ships with mathematics, destroyed plans with analysis, defeated strategy with intelligence. The real lesson isn't about code breaking, it's about hubris. The Japanese were so certain of their superiority they couldn't conceive being outsmarted. They confused complexity with security, tradition with strength. They never understood that the moment you think you're safe is when you're most vulnerable. I spent 3 years reading Japanese admirals' mail. It was the strangest intimacy, understanding enemies better than they understood themselves. I watched their empire collapse through messages they thought were secret. If I have one regret, it's that so many of my team died without recognition. They were heroes who couldn't be celebrated, warriors who fought with pencils and punch cards. History should remember them. The Japanese never knew we broke JN-25. Even now, some refuse to believe it. But we knew, and that knowledge was both triumph and burden. We changed history from a basement in Pearl Harbor. The story of JN-25 and the men who broke it stands as one of history's greatest intelligence achievements. A small team of American cryptanalysts working with primitive computers and extraordinary dedication systematically demolished Japanese naval communications security and changed the course of World War II. The Japanese Navy never knew their most trusted code was comprehensively broken. Through 3 years of war, through defeats that defied explanation, they maintained absolute faith in a system that betrayed their every move. This blindness, rooted in arrogance and institutional failure, cost Japan the war. The Americans who broke JN-25 received little recognition in their lifetimes. Rochefort was professionally destroyed for his success. His team was dispersed and silenced. Their achievement was classified for decades. Yet their invisible victory was perhaps the most decisive of the Pacific War. Today, in an age of digital encryption and quantum computing, the lessons of JN-25 remain relevant. No code is unbreakable, no system perfectly secure. Human factors, laziness, predictability, overconfidence, remain the greatest vulnerabilities. The same institutional blindness that prevented Japan from recognizing code compromise threatens every organization convinced of its own security. Station Hypo's basement is now a storage room, its IBM machines long scrapped, its heroes mostly forgotten. But their legacy endures in every intelligence operation, every code broken, every enemy message decoded. They proved that wars can be won through patience, brilliance, and the methodical breaking of enemy secrets. The Japanese never knew the US Navy had cracked their JN-25 code. That ignorance cost them their empire, their fleet, and ultimately their war. In the history of intelligence failures, none was more complete, devastating or preventable than Japan's blind faith in a code that had been broken by Americans working in a Pearl Harbor basement, intercepting every message, knowing every plan, and waiting patiently for the enemy to sail into the trap that ultra-intelligence had prepared. Their story reminds us that in intelligence, the most dangerous enemy is not the one who knows your secrets, but the one you never suspect is listening. The Imperial Japanese Navy learned this lesson too late, discovering only after surrender that throughout the war, American cryptanalysts had been reading their communications, directing their defeat, and ensuring that the Empire of the Rising Sun would set forever on Japan's ambitions in the Pacific.